A modern oasis of higher learning, the campus of Rochester Institute of Technology is a reflection of great promise, a center for innovation and creativity, and a community devoted to advancing those ideals. The momentum that carries RIT to this important moment is fueled by a history of great leadership. The origins of the RIT community date back to 1829. A group of Rochester businessmen formed the Athenaeum, providing access to literature, science, and the arts to the residents of a rapidly growing city. Many years later, Henry Loam, co-founder of Bosch & Loam, led a movement to create Mechanics Institute. It quickly created a pipeline of skilled workers, and its eventual merger with the Athenaeum served to strengthen that cause. In those early days, more than 400 students were enrolled at the Institute. Support from other prominent residents, such as George Eastman, propelled it through the start of the 20th century. Following the death of Henry Loam in 1908, the Institute appointed its first president. Carleton Gibson spent 6 years at the helm. He introduced a policy by which students spent a significant part of their study working in industry. What we know today as co-op was born. James Barker, the second president, and his successor, Royal Farnum, each served relatively brief terms at the Institute. In 1922, John Randall took over as the fourth president and formed a commission to study what would ensure the Institute's success. Students, it was determined, should be trained based on specific needs of industry, and the Institute thrived despite not offering degrees. By 1930, 2,200 students were enrolled. Randall's son-in-law, Mark Ellingson, took over as president in 1936. Ellingson would lead the Institute through tremendous post-war expansion, the awarding of its first academic degrees, and the adoption of a new name, Rochester Institute of Technology. Enrollment, which reached 4,400 in 1950, topped 8,000 just 10 years later. But possibly the greatest challenge to Ellingson's presidency was deciding the fate of RIT's downtown campus. Plans to link the inner loop to the New York State Thruway meant that portions of the campus would be demolished. One option? Move the campus to 1,300 acres of farmland in Henrietta. Adequate funding to support the move would be crucial, but a delivery to Ellingson's office, one presented to him by his secretary, appeared to seal the deal.
She gave me a letter telling me that we had been the residual legatee of the Grace Watson estate of $3.5 million. And that was just enough to say, well, we can do it. And so we did.
Joining RIT at the new campus would be the National Technical Institute for the Deaf. The announcement of this new college in 1966 became another key outcome of Ellingson's leadership. Shortly after RIT's move to the new campus, Paul Miller took over as its president in 1969. Miller piloted the university, with the student body surpassing 10,000, through an array of fiscal challenges. Still, he found the means by which to enhance its core mission.
There was an inner logic to RIT that could not be betrayed as a career-oriented cooperative education institution, but with a humane thrust, and that core had to be maintained.
Richard Rose assumed the presidency in 1979. He helped launch RIT's first PhD program in imaging science. He also stressed the notion that students in a technical school be exposed to more art, literature, philosophy, and culture, a pursuit served by the university's acquisition of Eisenhower College.
One of the fortuitous things that came out of the Eisenhower College is we really got 30 superbly trained faculty, and what gave us a chance to have a legitimate college of liberal arts and really had a strong liberal arts requirement that really rounded out the education very nicely.
In 1992, Al Simone joined RIT as its 8th president, stressing a commitment to student success. Under his leadership, the university launched additional PhD programs, and the physical campus underwent a major transformation, including new structures like the Gordon Fieldhouse and Activities Center. By the turn of the century, enrollment reached 14,000. Through it all, Simone's vision remained focused on moving RIT from good to great.
Mark got us on the ball field, you know, and then Paul got us to the 50-yard line, and Rich got us to the 80-yard line, and I'm going to try to get us to the 95-yard line, and then the next person, I'll be disappointed if that person doesn't take it away.
The search for that person proved extensive, but it eventually led to College Park and the campus of the University of Maryland. Bill Destler, that university's provost and senior vice president for academic affairs, was named RIT's 9th president in March.
Thank you.
Officially arriving on campus to begin work in July. President Destler enjoyed more than 30 years at Maryland, serving many roles, including educator. Chance Glenn, associate professor of engineering technology in RIT's College of Applied Science and Technology, and a Maryland graduate, recalls a mentor who inspired students to aim high.
I think the strongest thing about him was the ability to communicate and to reach individual students where they needed to be. That type of thing got embedded in me. And that's the kind of professor that I try to be. So he's very inspirational to me.
But beyond his success at motivating students, colleagues at Maryland say President Destler developed a real knack for leadership. Colleagues like his brother, Mac Destler, a professor of public policy.
Bill discovered that both he had this passion for education and improving it, and also capacity to really work with people and work with people in building things. And that even though his research in the field of electrical engineering was quite interesting and quite innovative, he, I think, increasingly found that where he could most make a contribution was in academic leadership.
I think that he commanded a great deal of respect because of his genuineness, both from the faculty as well as the students. He welcomed the students into his office, and so he made a good impact that way.
As Dean of Maryland's Clark School of Engineering, Bill Destler was hailed for enhancing its prominence and national rankings. He created the GEMSTONE program, an undergraduate research program that spans various disciplines to address significant concerns within society. As interim vice president for advancement, he brokered the deal financing the Comcast Center, a state-of-the-art complex which has transformed Maryland's athletics program. And during his tenure as senior vice president for academic affairs, graduation rates at Maryland rose from 62 to 80% in just 5 years.
Bill Destler's fingerprint is frankly on every corner of this university. There are hardly programs in this university that haven't benefited from Bill's contributions. Some of the most exciting and innovative educational programs in our university are directly architected by Bill Destler.
I think everybody on the campus gives him a lot of credit for his creativity of getting really good original ideas that can have impact. You know, he comes from a place with a large vision and a large national vision and international vision. He thinks big, he thinks in terms of expansion, he thinks in terms of excellence and high values.
Now, as President Destler turns his vision towards this university, he works closely with members of its community to understand the needs of RIT's many constituents, including nearly 16,000 students.
Dr. Destler has gone out of his way to really reach out to the entire student body. He recognizes that, we have a student body that's made up of engineers, artists, and those who are deaf and hard of hearing, and he's actually reaching out to all of our communities to kind of bring us all together under one RIT name.
And sometimes things just fit together. It doesn't happen very often. In this instance, we've got a person who really is able to bring things together, and that's what Dr. Destler has done.
And engaging the RIT community, it's clear that he's not doing it alone.
We're also very excited that Dr. Rebecca Johnson is here. The partnership and the teamwork that they have is very, very evident. And I think will just be one added feature that will take us to an even greater place by virtue of the fact of that kind of teamwork that the two of them have.
And what about those banjos? Those who truly understand President Destler's passion for this unusual pastime say it's a reflection on his style of leadership.
The way the history of the banjo is in America is the history of innovation in America and how things change. When I hear Bill Destler talking about making RIT become a place for innovation, I think of the banjo and how it changed over the course of the years from an agrarian instrument to a parlor instrument, and how mechanically it changed up into what it is today, a very loud bluegrass kind of instrument. But as the banjo changed, so did America, and it really reflects innovation in design.
Clearly, RIT thrives, due in no small measure to an amazing legacy of leadership. The commitment of these stewards has ensured the university's enduring relevance as a new leader prepares to make his mark.
Oh, Bill Destler, he'll be a great president. He has all the right stuff to be a first-class president.
It won't surprise me to hear how well Rochester is doing under his leadership.
I think in a few years, the whole community at RIT will feel the difference that you have a new president with a new vision.